and welcome to Good Evening Britain, a Force for Good's weekly show coming to you live from our studios here in the heart of the great British city of Glasgow, with me, your host, Alistair McConnachie. We are broadcasting on all our digital platforms throughout the United Kingdom and across the world. We're bringing you quality, pro-UK comment and analysis every Wednesday from 7 until 8 p.m. on YouTube, on Facebook, on X, and also on TikTok. Folks, please do send in your greetings on this lovely night. At least I hope it's lovely where you are in our wonderful British Isles, or indeed throughout the world. Please also send in your comments and your questions, and we'll do our best to read them out and to answer them. And tell us where you're watching from as well. We're always interested to find out where our viewers are. Maybe you're sitting in the back garden enjoying the sun, or maybe you're inside. Wherever you may be, please do tell us what's happening in your part of the world. Now, we've got a packed show for you. We were going to have our man on the spot, Damien Davies, who is presently at the Runcorn and Helsby by-election, which is being held tomorrow. He was on our show a few weeks ago. He was telling us that he was working for helping one of the parties there. He can't be with us tonight, unsurprisingly, perhaps, because he's busy helping his political party at that by-election, tomorrow being, of course, the voting day. So we are going to get him back on. And he can tell us his thoughts on that, and we'll all know the result late tomorrow night, whether or not Reform has in fact beat Labour to the post. Because as many of us know, this is a crucial Westminster by-election. Labour are struggling. The opinion polls have got Reform and Labour neck and neck. Interestingly, the Reform vote going up by a similar percentage as the Labour vote is going down, suggesting a lot of people leaving voting from Labour, going to Reform. Or maybe it indicates a lot of hitherto people who never voted joining the political discussion. So we'll have to see how that holds out. But if Reform were to win it, it would be a major landslide. And of course, throughout England as well, many of the councils are up for grabs also. So a busy day tomorrow at the English Council elections, with the Westminster by-election and the other council elections. Not all the council elections, but a significant number of them. And later in the programme, we're going to be looking at basically who gets to vote at those by-elections. And you will be surprised at the number of nationalities, almost countless, who can vote at the English local elections. Even more can vote in the Scottish and Welsh local elections. We'll be getting to that. We'll be getting to the corruption, what we believe is the corruption of the franchise, and the extent to which our democracy is under threat, you could say, from mass invasion. We're going to be looking at the connection between immigration and political democracy. That's later in the programme, and we're going to be using the English Council by-elections as our example. But let's start with the news from A Force for Good this week. When I spoke to you last week, we had returned from outside the Merchant's House in George Square, where we had been protesting John Swinney's fraudulent summit on the so-called rise of what he was fearing was the far right. So we turned up with our asylum frauds out and our mass deportation now banners, which would no doubt give him at least something to point to, if nothing else. But of course, we were simply articulating the concerns of a growing number of people in Glasgow who are most certainly not far anything other than far normal, and who want the borders to be properly policed, something that John Swinney and Keir Starmer are singularly failing at the moment. Anyway, enough of that. We had returned from that. On the Friday, we were interviewed by a YouTube personality called Nick Buckley, which you can find on YouTube, and he interviewed us for an hour on his program, Nick Buckley Live. Just search youtube.com for Nick Buckley, Buckley, and you'll see the program there. We've got his thumbnail for that program that you can look out for. Look out for that thumbnail. Nick Talks, A Force for Good. Scotland No Longer Scottish was the title that he gave the interview, and we certainly spoke about the dangers of Scotland no longer being visibly Scottish in some areas of Scotland, and increasingly these days in others. We also talked about the various failures of the SNP, and we talked about the state of the British Union also. So please do go to youtube.com, search for Nick Buckley, and you'll find that 1 hour interview, which we were very pleased about. We really, really enjoyed it. It's almost at 7,000 views, which is not bad for YouTube. And we do look forward to getting Nick on the program sometime in the not too distant future later this year. So that was a good piece of outreach that we did. Okay. Something else that we did, one of our supporters was down in Wales, of all places, in a lovely town called Barry in the Vale of Glamorgan, where there was a Welsh Separatist March being held there. And what do A Force for Good do at these kind of marches? Well, we video them from the beginning until the end of them. We find out how long they took to pass, and we count the numbers of people who were on it. And we acquired 2 pieces of video evidence of the march from beginning to end. But before we do that, let's put up a pic of, this is the march when it reached its final destination. Okay, so interestingly, the South Wales police appeared to be as good at counting marches as Police Scotland, and the South Wales police considered that there was, quote unquote, 6,000 to 7,000 people on the march. Does that look like a gathering of 6,000 to 7,000 people to you? Okay. So clearly when we heard these numbers, we're like, yeah, we've heard these numbers before. We'll wait until we get our video evidence so we can count them properly. And well, you won't be surprised to hear that there was not 6,000 or 7,000 on the march. It took less than 10 minutes to pass our counting points. There was not 5 to 6. There was not 4 to 5. There was not 3 to 4. There was not 2 to 3. There was not 1 to 2,000. There was not even 1,000 people on the march. There were 923. That was our average of several counts of them. 923, not excluding children who looked like 14 or under, who would only be there because their parents dragged them along. So 923 is the real count of that particular Yes Cymru march in Barry, not 6,000 to 7,000. South Wales Police, please take note. So again, important work that we're doing for the union here in exposing and revealing the true numbers. And we added that number to our list. We have an ongoing list which we have been compiling since 2018, showing the real figures versus the fraudulent figures. And you can find that on our website. Just search for fantasy figures on Google, fantasy figures, separatist marches, and you'll find that article. And you can look down and you can see all the pretended numbers compared with the real numbers, all of which we have video evidence for as well. Good stuff. Let's say hello to some people coming in today. Derek was first in. Good evening, Alistair and fellow unionists. It's another lovely sunny day, says Derek. Hi, Oksana and Kat. And Derek, always a supporter from Armadale. Catherine says hello. She's cooking spaghetti bolognese in England. Hello to British Legends and to Alan, who's working this evening but going to catch up later. Hi to Paul from the sunny garden of England. Oksana says, we cannot vote in other countries if we live there. That's generally speaking true. There's only a few countries in the world where British citizens can vote, and it's usually almost always in the situation where there's a reciprocal arrangement where their citizens can vote in the UK. We'll put out, I just mentioned the fantasy figures of the nationalist marches. We'll put that link out under our broadcast on X. And we've also put out the link to the Nick Buckley show there on YouTube and on Facebook. Thank you. Dominic asks a historical question. If England colonised Ireland, then why are they called Ulster Scots? Well, maybe some Ulster Scots can chime in on that one, but my understanding is that in the north of Ireland in particular, it was the Scots who colonised that particular area. Christopher says of the Welsh marchers, not the Welsh marshes, that's another phrase, isn't it? But of the Welsh marchers, there was 923 lost souls. Indeed, Stephen says excellent work on counting them. William Hawkins says because England gave land in Ireland to Scottish migrants. Well, my understanding is it was the King James VI who promoted at least that particular migration of people, especially from Scotland and England as well, into the north. Interesting period that remains controversial to this day. Clive is watching from East Sussex on the south coast. I bet that's quite nice today, Clive. Paul says the police should be politically neutral, but they should not be neutral between facts and falsehood, especially real figures versus fantasy march figures. I think I totally agree with you, Paul. My understanding of the police is that they're simply not good at counting marches. And I don't know what metrics they use, but I'll always remember the march in Dumfries when the Police Scotland said there was 10,000. And we wrote to them, said there's no way there could have been 10,000 because the march took less than 20 minutes to pass down a very narrow street. And we were there, but we did not have any video evidence. That was the march that made us realize we had to get video evidence. But we were adamant that there was not 10,000 there. And then about a year or two later, the actual figures, an actual video came out of the marches. And let me find here. I've got it recorded. Yes, all under one banner, and the police said 10,000. The actual was 1,854 after you counted them from the video. So again, the police there were 5 times in error. That information from 10 Years Strong, our special collector's issue of Union Heart. So I'm afraid the police are just not good at counting. I don't really think they have any political agenda there. They're just not good at making estimates. Some forces will be better than others. They really should hire us guys to do their crowd estimations. Christopher says that his relatives colonized Ulster, and they were from lowland Scotland, which of course is the closest place across the water. Hello to Anthony. Makes you wonder about the police's crime stats. Well, that's true, isn't it? Okay, let's deal with the Grangemouth story. Now, today it was confirmed, unfortunately, that the Grangemouth Oil Refinery is closing down. Now, there's a big establishment over there at Grangemouth. The refinery is a major part of that establishment, but the rest of it deals with importing and exporting oil that's already refined. But the ability to refine oil is like a national requirement. If you want energy independence for your nation, and you want to be able to process, you want to be able to extract the oil, you want to be able to transport the oil, you want to be able to refine the oil, you want to be able to export the oil, you want to do everything you can with it. So you do need all the industry to process oil from out of the ground into the vehicle or machine. If you want proper energy independence, you don't want to be importing your refined oil. So that's just a fact of energy independence. And if we had a government in Westminster who cared about keeping Britain energy independent, then this would all be a part of a long-term plan that they would be understanding, and they would be making provision looking into the future in order to maintain all of that kind of industry. And they would also be ensuring that the rest of British industry was such that it was all catered for. For example, we would have a steel industry, we would have a heavy duty machinery industry, and all of these would be functioning upon the energy that we ourselves were producing. So it would all be a joined up system. But what has happened over the years is that the British state, run essentially by economic globalists, has given up that sense of national control to the point where you get faced with these emergencies like the Port Talbot steel industry getting closed down. They stepped in at the very last moment to keep a couple of, to keep that open to a certain extent. People were saying, why couldn't they have done that with the Grangemouth Oil Refinery? Well, they could have done that with the Grangemouth Oil Refinery if they had enough long-term planning in mind And people were pointing this out to them, but they were not taking notice. And when I blame ultimately the British government, it is ultimately the British government to blame, but it's also the Scottish executive as well, because they were not properly standing up for, and all of Holyrood at the same time, not properly standing up for Scottish industry in Scotland, especially not fossil fuel industry. In fact, they were doing absolutely everything that they could to base, and are still doing everything they can to shut down Scottish fossil fuel energy. If you don't believe me, here's the then leader, Nicola Sturgeon, taking great delight in shutting down Scotland's final coal processor. Take a look at this video.
4, 3, 2, 1, fire.
Scottish Power is demolishing Scotland's last remaining coal-fired power station. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon pushed the button, bringing down the chimney at Longannet Power Station, which has dominated the Firth of Forth skyline for more than 50 years.
I think this is a really special day. It's a poignant day, and it will no doubt generate mixed emotions for people who've worked in this site over 50 years. But it symbolises that transition Scotland is making away from fossil fuels to renewable, low-carbon sources of energy. It marks the definitive end of coal in Scotland.
Yeah, wonderful, right? A special day. A special day which marks the definitive end of coal production in Scotland and the move away from fossil fuels. That was Nicola Sturgeon on the 9th of December 2021, pushing the button to blow up the chimney of Scotland's last coal-fired power station at Longannet, symbolising the end of coal-fired power generation in Scotland, seen as a step towards Scotland's goal of achieving net zero emissions by 2045. So that she is the leader of an administration which was taking great delight in, and is taking great delight in, shutting down Scotland's fossil fuel energy industry. So John Swinney, don't you turn round to me or anybody else with your crocodile tears when you and your ideology are what is responsible for allowing Scotland's only remaining oil refinery to go with the wind. You, John Swinney, are responsible for not standing up and advocating for it, as well as, of course, the Labour people and the Lib Dem people and the Greens, who, of course, are secretly delighted today at the news that 400 people will be losing their job at that oil refinery. But ultimately, of course, we live in a union, and it's the British state which must carry the can and ultimately the blame for that. But you know what? If they had started pushing money into Grangemouth and keeping that oil refinery open, I bet you the first people who would be complaining would be Nicola Sturgeon, would be John Swinney, would be the Labour people going, this isn't good for the green transition. This is going against our climate goals. This is going to make us all burn to a crisp by 2045. You know, so in that sense, I suppose they couldn't win. But seriously, if people like myself were in power, and if the oil refinery were not able to turn a profit, we would still see it as an essential national industry, as an essential national resource. And some essential national resources just don't turn a profit. They do need to be kept going through subsidies. And so there is a case for nationalisation at certain times, especially when a critical national resource is in danger of going under. You do need to prop it up and keep it going. Ideally, of course, as part of a much wider programme of industrialisation, so that its products will have a purpose within the overall national industrial policy. And that's what should be happening. And only then, when you have a joined up industrial policy, will you be able to get the private investment coming in, where the private businessmen can see that they'll make a profit, and also where you can put in public money, you can put in taxpayers' money without fearing that it's just going down a black hole. So yeah, a lot of SNP hypocrisy on display today because they were doing nothing about it. And there's a picture here, I don't know where it came from, but when it came from rather, but it's these people demonstrating against the closure. And I find their banner interesting. It says Grangemouth Refinery, extend, absolutely, invest, absolutely, and transition. Well, you see, they're trying to defend and keep open Grangemouth Refinery using the same ideology, which is implicitly working to close it down at the end of the day. So I don't see, I'm all for extending and investing, but they should lay off the transition thing, because it's the transition thing which is killing it. Okay. But even some of these, maybe these unions, they just see, look, that politically, that's really all that we can talk about. Politically, maybe they feel that they can't say the transition thing's a load of nonsense. Net zero is a load of nonsense. Climate change is a load of nonsense. You know, you can get to the stage where it's politically impossible to say something that everybody believes, even if everybody believes a lie, even if everybody believes something that's literally not real, then it can be almost impossible to go against that, even if you've got the truth on your side. So sometimes, maybe in that case, the union people feel they have to go along with the transition thing because that's the only thing that people will connect with. Maybe that's the reason, but ultimately it's the green transition which is corrupting all of our industry, which is far too expensive, certainly at the moment, and probably always will be, and totally unnecessary when we have abundant fossil fuels in existence. So very, very bad state of affairs, something that could be properly addressed by a government that had the national interests at heart and was not falling foul of the climate fantasies, which we're all obliged, it seems, to believe. Let's have a look at some of the comments. Hi to John from sunny Scotstoun. Glad to hear the sun shining over there. As he says, we can't even support our farmers. Paul says it's fragmentation and short-termism all the way regarding our industries. Isn't it just? Alexander says the Falkirk MSP a few months ago was talking nonsense about numerous interested parties, but couldn't disclose anything due to confidentiality. Christopher says the power industry is a case in point. It should never have been privatized. We have lost control of industrial strategy. Yes, that whole privatization versus nationalism thing got corrupted back in the 1970s when, if you believed in nationalization rather, of industries, you were considered some sort of aberrant Soviet communist in disguise. Whereas if you believed in privatization, you were some kind of freedom-loving capitalist. Two extremes were posited, neither of which were accurate, but people took their sides. And at the end of the day, the privatization one seemed to win out, but it also ended up selling off our industries to the lowest possible bidders privateers throughout the world, to the point where now everything is owned by private interests who don't care one way or the other about the nation of Britain. They only care about making as much money as possible and living in a foreign country somewhere, while laughing at us peons as we scrape the crumbs off of their table. Yes, politics has painted them into a corner regarding the unions that whose only defence is to argue for a just transition. Politics has painted them into a corner, and that can happen. That can happen with every politician, no matter how clever they are. They can suddenly, if they believe something that's not correct, then what's going to happen down the line is they're going to end up painting themselves into a corner from which they cannot escape, and they'll only make things worse. That's why it's always best to try as much as possible to live in the truth. Derek coming back in with a historical point about Northern Ireland. He says Scotland was mainly Protestant religion at the time of the Reformation. It was its main Protestant religion was Presbyterian, and they were called Ulster Scots. The Americans wrongly say Scots Irish. Interesting. Okay. What I want to do now is briefly look at a very good article that appeared in the Daily Telegraph. Let me share the screen here. I'll hold Yeah, let me bring it up on the screen. Where's it gone? Where's it gone? Let me refresh this. Here it is. Here we go. Britain's immigration policy should ruthlessly discriminate against poor countries. There you go. By Sam Ashworth Hayes. Now, this appeared online on the 24th of April, and it was in the 25th of April print edition. He says quite rightly, it's long past time. It's long past time that we started applying scrutiny to migrants' countries of origin. And he says, and it's like what we were talking about earlier there about the British government simply not looking properly at vital issues. This short-termism, fragmentation, as Paul said. Sam says, perhaps the strangest feature of Britain's economic reliance on mass migration is that nobody can be entirely sure that this economic reliance exists. British policymakers looking to juice growth and boost spending power have spent decades pursuing a policy of immigration without seeming to check that this supposed necessity actually is one. The core of the problem is straightforward. While other policies are subjected to rigorous assessments and the scrutiny of the Treasury, migration slips under the radar. Newcomers are treated as if they are interchangeable, while the short-term focus on fiscal forecasts, meaning tax forecasts, keeps lifetime costs out of sight and out of mind. Lifetime costs, that is to say, the cost of the immigrant over the period of his or her life. Are they net contributors or are they net recipients of taxes? And what these are things that are like so basic. So it's like, okay, do people from Africa, for example, are they putting in taxes more than they're taking out? Are people from Poland putting in more than they're taking out? Are people from the USA putting in more in taxes than they're taking out? We need to know that in order that we need to be able to generalize about what are the best countries for immigrants who are going to contribute the most economically into the country. You know, that's just basic data that is going with the wind, as everything does in our lovely but misgoverned country. So going down here, he says, here we are. Different groups, for example, have different numbers of children and different requirements for schooling and maternity services. Until recently, we knew which nationalities paid how much in tax and which claimed welfare, although we've stopped publishing these figures. We know who tends to end up in social housing. So just as we should be publishing on immigrants who commit crimes and what countries they disproportionately come from, so we should also be publishing these figures again. Here we go. Impact of migrants varies by national origin. The blue one there is Western migrants. The light blue one is Danes. This is a study taken from Denmark. The very, very light blue one at the bottom there is what's called MENAPT immigrants, which are people from the Middle East and North Africa and Pakistan and Turkey. And they respond the poorest. Researchers in the Netherlands have found that Western immigrants bring a net benefit of 36,000 each, and non-Westerns drain the pot by 143,000. These are very serious figures, and we need to know more about them. And thankfully, we've got people like him speaking up and saying these need to be published. These need to be published. Until this is addressed and we can see the alternative working, a sensible migration policy would account for this in its decision making. Differences between countries matter, as well as differences between individuals, and a person's nationality is a useful indicator of their long-term impact on the tax purse. Absolutely, absolutely. So these are figures that need to be discussed. These are figures that need to be discussed, and they should be discussed. And we're writing a book at the moment about this. We're hoping to get it published in the next couple of months if we can raise the funds for that. And we're going to be addressing all that kind of stuff as well. But these are basic pieces of data that our government doesn't properly collect. And so we don't actually know whether or not what they say about immigration and tax benefits is even true or not. And if they are true, to whom do they apply and to whom do they not apply? Crucial, critical stuff. Again, just the normal workings of what you would imagine a sensible, serious government would do, but alas, not possible in Great Britain. And another area which does not get proper consideration as well, another area which does not get proper consideration is the impact of immigration on our actual political democracy. Many people imagine that only British citizens can vote. Tomorrow we have English council elections. Many people will be going to those elections thinking it's only British citizens and immigrants who have become British citizens who will be allowed to vote at that local election. Well, actually, that's not the case at all. And we've got a list here, a long list of people who can vote at tomorrow's English council elections. Let's bring up the other one. This one, who can vote? And we made this a post today. Obviously, British citizens of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, the Channel Islands and the Isle of Man. But did you know that there's 14 overseas British territories from Anguilla, Bermuda, Indian Ocean, Virgin Islands, Cayman Islands, Falkland Islands, Gibraltar, Montserrat, Pitcairn, St. Helena, Ascension Island, Tristan da Cunha, South Georgia, South Sandwich, areas of Cyprus and the Turks and Caicos Islands. Now, there's not going to be very many of them granted, but they can all vote. And I understand that's fair enough. They're kind of part of the British jurisdiction, and the King is the head of all of them. So yeah, they can vote. However, here's the amazing thing. Look at all these Commonwealth countries. Look at all of these Commonwealth countries. And I can't even read that out, but there's more as well. Let's have the second one up there. So more Commonwealth countries there as well. And then you've got people from Hong Kong who have come in under at a certain time with a certain passport. Then you've got, this is England, you've got 5 members of the European Union who have reciprocal relationships with England. That's Denmark, Luxembourg, Poland, Portugal, and Spain. They can all vote. And you've also got Cyprus and Malta, who are part of the EU and also part of the Commonwealth. And then you've got the Republic of Ireland, who have been able to vote since forever, actually. They're still able to vote. Citizens of the ROI can vote at any British election, as can everybody from the Commonwealth also. Okay. So huge numbers of people there who can vote, and we can't necessarily vote in their country. For example, at British general elections, if you're an Indian, you're not a British citizen, you're just simply an Indian with legal access and residence in Britain. You can vote at every election in Britain, including the British general election. However, me, we go to India, we can't vote unless we're Indian citizens, which is the way it should be. Similarly with Pakistan, if you're a legal resident from Pakistan living in the UK, you can vote at every election in the United Kingdom, including British general elections. And there's, I'm going to say 56 countries, not including the United Kingdom, who are members of the Commonwealth. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. All of these people can vote at every election in the United Kingdom. That seems to me crazy. How did that come about? So I did a wee bit of research, and I found a document written by the House of Commons Library and published on the 11th of July 2024. Who can vote in UK elections? And let's put up the first page from that. It explains that Commonwealth citizens can vote. In 1926, an imperial conference of the semi-independent dominions of the empire agreed that citizens were all equal members of a community within the British Empire. They all owed allegiance to the British king or queen, although the United Kingdom did not rule over them. This community was called the British Commonwealth of Nations. By the Second World War, many of the dominions were independent. However, many did not seek to establish their own citizenship until after the Second World War. From 1949, republics and other countries could be part of the Commonwealth. In his book, The Electoral System in Britain, Robert Blackburn comments that the British Nationality and Status of Aliens Act 1914 was refined by the British Nationality Act 1948 to, quote, replace the nation of common nationality with a system of reciprocal Commonwealth citizenship. It also provided a system where countries such as India and the African republics were still to be regarded for nationality purposes as British subjects. Okay, and the next part of that, going to the last paragraph, the Representation of the People Act 1983 refers to the franchise as encompassing Commonwealth citizenship using the term in the broad sense envisaged by the British Nationality Act 1948. The government gave assurances during the passage of the British Nationality Act 1981 that the new definition of British subject would not alter the possession of civic rights and privileges such as the right to vote. Okay. So what you're looking at there is the right of all people in the Commonwealth to vote at every election in the United Kingdom relates back basically to the 1948 British Nationality Act, which was brought in before mass immigration, okay, which didn't occur until the 1950s. And it basically said that if you're a member of the Commonwealth, we're going to regard you as a British subject, which technically is a subject of the king. And that has not been changed ever since, even though we've had mass immigration and even though many of these Commonwealth countries are no longer part of the crown. They're republics. So these people are not actually British subjects anymore. But still, they're considered to be British subjects, and they're still therefore given the vote in the United Kingdom. Well, I get that. I get the idea that there's a kind of sentimentality there. That isn't it nice that these people are voting because they were once part of our great empire? I get that. But today, how many people are coming from Nigeria, for example, and thinking to themselves, good old George VI signing off on that British Nationality Act 1948. What a lad he was. Isn't that fantastic? We love all of those sorts of things about British history and tradition. I don't know if that crosses anybody's mind. I think maybe back in the early 50s it did. At that brief period after the war, up to the 60s, I think there was among some immigrants a sense of British culture, which encouraged them to come to the United Kingdom. I get all of that. But I think now in 2025, all of that is kind of in the past. It seems out of time. And so why are all of these people from the Commonwealth still getting the vote? What I would say is that the only people who should get a vote, whether at local council election, whether at mayoral elections, whether at police commissioner elections, or whether at devolved elections, or whether at British general elections, are British citizens. And I would make a couple of exceptions. I would say, obviously, the people of the British overseas territories, there's 14 of them, including Gibraltar, the Falklands, and so on. They should also have the vote because they are part of British jurisdiction. And of the Commonwealth countries, only the Crown Commonwealth countries, that is, only the 15 Commonwealth countries that have the king still as the head of state, who are still technically British subjects. Okay, they can have the vote, but only if there's a reciprocal agreement in their country that we can get the vote in their country. That's the way it should be now. And our policy pays proper respect to the ideology of the 1948 British Nationality Act, which is give the vote to people who are British subjects, genuine British subjects of the King. Today, that would be all British citizens, all members of the British Overseas Territories, and all members of the British Crown Commonwealth. But all these other Commonwealth countries, Nigeria, Pakistan, India, there's no reason for their citizens to have the vote in the United Kingdom. It's absurd, utterly absurd. Now, it's even worse. It's even worse because in the devolved constituencies, in the devolved regions, to say Scotland and Wales, not only do all of these people have the vote, but everybody in the world has a vote. All you need to be is a legal resident. So you could come in on a student visa 2 or 3 months before the Holyrood election. You could be here only for 3 years, 4 years. You'll get a vote at the Holyrood election. And there are people who also want to bring that in to England as well. They don't really have a case for it. The people up here didn't ever have a case for it, but they got that through in 2020. David Cameron gave the power over the franchise to the Senedd and to Holyrood in the 2016 Scotland Act. And by 2020, the SNP and Greens and Labour and Lib Dems took advantage of it in order to give everybody the vote at Holyrood elections, regardless of whether that person is invested in this country or in the long term. All you needed to be was legally resident on any kind of work visa, student visa, family visa, or official refugee status, or indefinite leave to remain without being a British citizen. And there are people who want to bring that into England as well, especially now with groups like Reform rising, because what they want to do is they want to give the vote to new immigrants faster than groups like Reform can convince the indigenous population to vote for them. So they're seeing that the only way they can stop the rise of Reform is basically to gerrymander the franchise. And think about it, if you are importing tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people each year, legal immigrants, giving them legal residence and giving them the vote on top of that, how quickly do you think that will utterly change the British political landscape? And the franchise is something that our organisation has been concerned about from the very beginning. When we heard, for example, that EU citizens were going to be able to vote at the 2014 Scottish referendum, we started to look into this in a big way and to see the dangers of it as well. Imagine in a few years, say if this was to be brought in England, every legal resident gets the vote. Say they brought that in England just at council elections. What are you going to have each year? You're going to have these constituencies are going to have such a high level of churn of new immigrants. The new immigrants are going to be told that party over there wants to deport you. They want to deprive you of your rights. They want to send you to prison. They want to do this, that, and the next thing. All sorts of alarmist ideas will be will be put into the heads of all of these immigrants, and they're not going to be voting for reform, are they? So the franchise is a massive issue, and it's being transformed by mass immigration. And I don't see anybody talking about this other than a force for good. We're going to have a couple of chapters of it in our new book. But basically, the solution is simple. We do need to disenfranchise a lot of people who should not have the vote throughout the United Kingdom. We need to have one franchise for the whole of the UK. And we need to disenfranchise lots of people who are not British citizens. They should not have the vote. Only British citizens, only British overseas territories, and only Crown Commonwealth. These are the only people that we're thinking about giving the vote to. Everybody else, sorry. And if you're upset about that, well, you can always go somewhere else where you can vote. It's such a kind of nuanced issue, though, that it doesn't set the woods on fire. In the old days, it used to set the woods on fire, denying the vote to certain categories of men or certain categories of women. That certainly quite literally set the woods on fire. But these days, people have got kind of just used to it, and they're very easily convinced not to even think about this issue. But it's a vital issue, because in a democracy, it's the way our country moves. Our country moves in the way that people vote. And if you're giving the vote to huge numbers of people who have got no long-term stake in this country, and who are in and out, who are constantly churning over as well, coming into the country, leaving the country, but getting the vote for the few months or years that they happen to be here, you will transform that country. So we need to make it an issue. We're doing what we can to make it an issue. But tomorrow, when you go to the English council elections, remember, you're not alone. You're not voting just because you're a British citizen. Basically, huge numbers have got the vote. Huge numbers who should not have it have got it. So that's our new rallying cry: disenfranchise people. I'm kidding in that sense, but ultimately that's what needs to be done. There's large numbers who need to have the vote taken off them, because they're going to change the country in ways that is not acceptable, because they've got no long-term stake in the country. They're not British citizens. They should not be deciding the direction of Britain if you're not a British citizen. I would never think about going to a foreign country and demanding the vote without first becoming a citizen of that country. Anyway, rant over. Comments. TC says, absolutely unfounded at this information, Alistair. I'm absolutely fuming at the amount of foreign immigrants allowed to change the course of our British nation. Unbelievable, absolutely unbelievable. Christopher, no one who is not British should be allowed to vote. Not one, but they are. Stephen says, the Lib Dems are plotting to allow 4 million asylum seekers to vote. Well, I saw that. And that's what made me look into this in the last couple of days, just made me revisit this. I don't think they're going to get away with that, because asylum seekers are not legally resident. But what they'll do is they'll say that they're going to have asylum seekers, that they're going to promote that. And then as part of a wider bill to open up the franchise, everybody will get concerned about that, about asylum seekers and illegals somehow getting the vote. Then what they'll do is they'll drop that and they'll say, it's panic's over, asylum seekers and illegals are not going to get the vote. It's only just going to be legal residents. As in 1.2 million legal residents who came into the country last year. And people won't see the wee trick that was played there, and they'll go along with it. That's the danger. But yeah, the Lib Dems can be guaranteed to take the most retarded policy and promote it. They're a bit like the Labour Party, the Greens and the SNP in that regard. Stephen says 58% of all new migrants since the 1990s have been economically inactive and claiming benefits and are a net drain, according to Migration Watch. Yes, that's very good, very good. Christopher says quite rightly, the 1948 British Nationality Act was the greatest disaster to befall the UK post-war. Certainly was. And Christopher also says that it was David Cameron who allowed the Scottish Executive to rebrand as the Scottish Government. Cameron was absolutely hopeless. We do have a good article on citizenship and the vote already up at aforceforgood.uk/single-post/citizenship. Derek's already written his manifesto here. The way we govern ourselves must be reformed. Our laws must be changed to protect our hard-built way of life. A white Christian constitution must be written and adhered to, with British flags flying in schools and every public building. We cannot give foreigners the vote who are going to vote to break up our country, says Catherine. Absolutely. And even if they didn't vote to break it up, what they're going to do is they're going to vote to change it into something different, quite naturally and understandably from their perspective. British Legends says, totally agree, well said. Yes, that's what I was getting at when I was talking to Stephen there. It's a left-wing tactic. Demand much more than you need, such as votes for asylum seekers, then roll back and everybody thinks it's okay again because you rolled back a bit, but you were actually further forward than you wanted to be when you started, even though you rolled back from the most that you demanded. Budgie, you've got a good way of putting these points of view into very few words. Thank you. Now, goodness me, the evening has gone very quickly. That's the banner along the bottom there, aforceforgood.uk/union-supporters. Now, today is the end of our tax year. We've been looking at the books today, and it's a little bit concerning, but we will survive as we always do, but we'll only survive with the help of everybody out there, all you good people who are watching. So anybody who wants to support our work during the rest of this year, please do consider becoming a monthly donor. You can become a monthly donor from only 69 pence a week, which over a 52-week period divided by 12 works out at £3 a month, which is a fairly modest fee. It really does help us, though. You can subscribe if you want, even for a £5 or a tenner or more than that. But we're intensely grateful to everybody who does that already. And if you're in a position to maybe start doing it, then please do go to that link, aforceforgood.uk/union-supporters. And you'll notice we also have rewards available, which are free to claim, and we'll be delighted to send you the rewards as well if you want to request them. For those who'd rather just give a one-off, and at this particular time, a one-off would be much appreciated. Although if you could leave it to tomorrow morning or at least 1 minute past midnight, then we won't have to add it to our surplus or deficit this year for the benefit of the books, which have been kind of completed now. So yeah, if you could hold off until tomorrow before you make a donation, please, at aforceforgood.uk/donate to. By tomorrow, I mean the 1st of May. Anytime after that or on that date would be perfect. And of course, our shop as well for anybody who wants to purchase any of our materials. Including, you'll find a link to Amazon at our shop, or you can go to Amazon and search for One Big Country, Volume 1 of A Big Book for the Union. Volume 2, as we've said, is going to be about protecting our national borders. We really do appreciate anything that you can do for us, folks. Nice comment here. Thanks to all our supporters for joining us this evening, and thanks to those who took part by posting your interesting comments. See you all next Wednesday from 7 until 8 p.m. It's good night from the staff at A Force for Good. It's good night from me. It just remains for me to say, God bless the United Kingdom and God save the King. See you next week.